So I'm Dan Pitt from MEF, and I'm really pleased with the panel we have because we represent really a whole value chain here. We have, at the top of the chain, we have the actual customer, which is Microsoft IT. And Gert van der Straten comes from Belgium, I think Limburg, working for Microsoft. And then, so he's the ultimate customer. And then we have one of the vendors who provides the infrastructure, and that is Nicolas Thomas from Grenoble in France, working for Fortinet. And then we have the service provider who really offers it, collects the money, orchestrates it, arranges it, buys the equipment, and that in this case is Tata Communications from India. Jeff Schwartz is here from Boston. So I want to thank the panel for joining. And what we're trying to get at in this session here, in this panel, is what are the user requirements that are really driving what we do in MEF? We have 200 and I don't know how many member companies, and they're primarily service providers and vendors. And we don't really have enterprises, but the enterprises dictate what we do. So among other things, we formed an Enterprise Advisory Council. Gert is kind enough to serve on that. Major global enterprises. They're the ones we are really trying to serve. I mean, if you look at a telecom operator's business, it's either enterprises or consumers. This is mostly an enterprise business that we're talking about. Increasingly, as we get to supporting more mobile services, it will be more industrial and consumer customers. So I want to start this, what are the requirements that are driving this, and then how does MEF 3.0 satisfy these requirements from both the vendors and the operators' viewpoints. So we're going to start with Gert and ask him what it is that he wants in terms of these characteristics of services we have described here. And he doesn't necessarily have to know how it's provided. He doesn't really care how it's provided. We want to make it possible for the operators to make the best choices of solutions and technologies and products and proprietary and open source, whatever they want to provide the service that meets the customer's needs. So we're going to start with the customer needs first, and I turn it over to you, Gert.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So you kind of set the stage correctly that, as an enterprise customer, it's nice to see everything that's happening in MEF, but at the end of the day, there's no direct interaction from my perspective, from most of the enterprise customers, I guess. So yeah, it looks great. So obviously we want to go on a portal, we want to order a line, we want to get it quick, we want to get it at the right price. It would be, one of my personal responsibilities is real-time collaborations. So we would like to get end-to-end quality of service. We would like to get dynamic bandwidth that we can scale up and scale down on an as-needed basis. Unfortunately, the reality of what I've been dreaming here all the time is a little bit different. So we still see that, and I give one example. We went through a new RFP for a certain part of the world for the IT offices, so to connect Microsoft internal offices. I have to estimate it took us about probably between, when the provider calls us and said, oh, it's ready, just plug it in, it's going to work. I think the engineering team in my organization took about 50 to 100 hours on average to get one packet through. Right? So that's the reality that we're facing today. Obviously, there's a big demand to change that. Now, that to put in perspective what I see from the outside, on the other hand, looking at connectivity, and this is not something that I think as an enterprise is something that only we are doing as being Microsoft IT. Like you talk about the Enterprise Advisory Council, we hear a lot of other enterprises looking into this. We're kind of looking primarily at connectivity as a commodity today. So we think about, I would estimate at least 75% of offices, we're just going to connect to the internet. We're going to step away from everything else that is more expensive than an internet connection initially. So we're not targeting, obviously, our Puget Sound campus or even the campus in Hyderabad where we have a lot of engineering workloads. But knowledge workers, people that have the majority of their workloads in the cloud, we will just connect them up to the internet. We have a pilot going on with about 15 offices today. And honestly, the experience so far has been really good. It has been, even for voice and video, it has been surprisingly good. Now, this is probably not the internet connectivity I buy at home. It's like a premium carrier that has a direct connectivity in the back end into the cloud that can be for a little bit better connectivity than just premium or default internet. So I look at this like, and it has been mentioned before, if somebody wants to sell me, and I'm not in direct negotiation with carriers, obviously, that's another thing. We have a dedicated team of probably 5, 6 people that have to do nothing else than talk to carriers to keep something up and running. If somebody is going to present me a basic connectivity, there needs to be something on top of it. We need maybe services, being it security services, being it SD-WAN services, being it any type of services, before I think it makes any sense to pay more or to pay a higher price than we should pay for an internet connection. Does that make sense?
If it's coming from the customer who pays, it has to make sense. All right, Jeff, what do you say?
I think there's a couple very good comments there. I believe one of the largest shifts in dynamics is happening from the perspective of what the customer is expecting to happen. And the customer typically in the past expected to buy something from point A to point B, point A, B, and C, multi-point or point-to-point type of environment, expected it to work. An Ethernet service provider would say, I don't care what you put on it, I don't care what you do with it, I'm going to connect it, and it's going to work. Nowadays, it's about the application. It's about where your workload is going to be, what you're doing with it, where you're doing it, what you need to happen when you go and procure some type of compute or storage or power somewhere in the world. And so as a service provider of underlying network capabilities, what we're now looking at is what that experience needs to be in order to drive performance at the application level across public data centers, private data centers, campus and branch communities. And so for us, it's no longer about showing that we've connected you and that it's up. It's about connecting you and showing you how those applications are performing regardless of where you're using them and how you're using them. And then from the MEF's perspective, that doesn't mean it's just Ethernet. It's public network, it's private network, it could be MPLS-based, VPN, it could be Ethernet. So now it's applications, lots of network connectivity, performance at the application level, virtualizing some of those functions, and now not only distributing those functions and workloads between data centers, but guess what? Intelligent edges, so that certain performance, certain processing can be done closer to the customer, campus environments. So now it's even distributing that capability out in a way that provides an additional layer of performance in addition to hybrid connectivity, public and private, moving workloads. Now you're saying public and private workloads, public and private connectivity, and where is the greatest optimized reference point to process that work? And how do we make that happen for a customer? That is, from Tata's perspective, a service provider's perspective, a managed service provider's perspective, skin in the game going forward. That's how I differentiate myself, and that's how I improve the performance of my constituents, the enterprise provider. Yeah.
So one thing you mentioned, Kurt, was security and having secure services. We don't get that from the basic internet. And you want it, you're not willing to pay too much for it, but it is important. So Nicolas, how do you make that available and make it worthwhile?
Maybe just a quick recap on why Fortinet is a MEF member, and we try to create the security as a service group in MEF. It's not so obvious as the other one, so I just mentioned that. Today and for the past years, we've been selling security technology to end customers directly, to enterprises. It was the good old days of the perimeter of your data center, when you can afford one guy managing that firewall. They know this version of this firewall, and they can kind of protect your data center. This is gone. Your data is everywhere, and there is a lot of lower size enterprise who cannot afford the new guys, the new security positioning. So there is a big demand to the one providing connectivity to provide security with it, automated, managed, etc. And also the acceptance of trusting someone for your workloads. All the story of the clouds, people putting their CRM in Salesforce. Think about it. That is your core business, is your customers. So they trust now third parties to work for them on many aspects. Why not trusting your service provider to do network security? They do network. They should know or to do network security for you. And that's why we are part of this, and we help. We already have a bunch of service provider providing security as a service directly, but we foresee the need for their end customers to not only get that on their local networks, but globally. And on the technical aspect of that, running and trusting that you have, for example, a VNF providing security and taking responsibility with it goes with the fact that your infrastructure is made for that, which is unfortunately not the case today, or not focused enough from people. Can be done, but most of the time there is one little parameter missing and the whole thing is open. So we want also to have those thinking, those dynamics going through the ecosystem and of service providers, because if we have to tailor the solution every single time to be able to provide the security to the end customers, it's going to take forever. So we really need a common language and common focus on being able end-to-end to ensure we provide security to the end customers together, and we are the one who wants to provide the technology and the knowledge.
So what aspects of MEF 3.0 or the LSO reference architecture give you that consistent approach and make it possible to serve multiple customers without having custom-tailored solutions for each one?
The fact that the boundaries, the domain and the boundaries and the certification are well defined, it helps to start having the common language on what needs to be done, and then we can work on those things. Because coming from providing the technology, we focus on the new malware and what's going on the dark web and all that. We are not an operator. We don't know how you, and we have many customers. So this framework gives us a view of how an operator works and what their scalability issues and the process, so we can adapt and see where we need to focus to help you deliver that service at the end and define the service, of course.
Garrett, you were going to say something after Jeffrey spoke.
Yeah, trying to remember. I think it's good what Nicolas said. So I just want to say, so I'm not. When I talk about 70% of the offices and probably 80% of the workforce, those are people like myself. Like, you wake up in the morning, you work from your hotel. I stop by Starbucks. I work from Starbucks. I go home in the evening. I work from home. Why do I need a different protection at home, at Starbucks, in my hotel, in the office? It should, for the majority of our workers, it's going to be the same. So that's kind of why security is a very important piece, but it's moving. And I look at it from a network perspective because I'm a networking person. So I think the security is more moving towards the endpoint and to the cloud as a service, and no longer as a device on the network, right? So you kind of address that too. So.
Yeah, I'd say from a security perspective, there's a couple additional elements too. As a service provider, we look at MEF, we look at LSO, and we're part of the MEFnet deployments in terms of orchestrating capabilities, orchestrating the delivery of service. But what's important is where is the service and what are you actually deploying for a customer? So we look at Sonata, all of the APIs as a way to work with our wholesale partners, because ourselves, we can't be everywhere in the world, and other service providers can't be every single place in the world. We leverage each other's network environments to be able to bring services everywhere our customers need them. So we have to have a standardized approach for interconnecting via those NNIs and automating through our own network and across those NNIs, northbound, southbound, and then east and west. And from the customer's perspective, where that data is located has a lot of geopolitical and regulatory requirements. So we have to manage the experience, whether it's security or otherwise, in a way that deals with HIPAA in the US, or if you go online here, you come from outside of Europe and you come here, every time you go to a web page, you have to select, I'm accepting something. So where that data is and what you're authorized to do with that data is as important to our environment as ever before, because that data is traversing all elements of these global networks. And we have to be able to manage that from a security perspective. And I believe that I'd actually ask the question back because to Gert, because Gert, you mentioned, can the security relationship be the same whether I'm in Starbucks or someplace else? And perhaps if you're using a VPN, which is what you're doing, you're VPNing in over public internet? No?
No, I think approximately, obviously there is a VPN connection, but 95% of applications in the cloud are not going over VPN. So there's like HR tools and stuff, and I'm sure there's like very specific engineering workloads that require somebody to VPN in.
Right.
95% of our traffic is going over the internet. It's not going through the VPN anymore.
And O365 prefers a public environment, right?
Well, it's in the cloud. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter in which cloud. I mean,
Right.
I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that the data and the applications, or the applications that using that data, is going to allow you to have access to it in certain different ways. So I think what's important is the security, perhaps that Fortinet's providing it, and others that are providing, is recognizing, okay, what are you doing with that data, and how are you actually using that data, and are you going to allow someone that's sitting in Europe accessing data in the U.S. for U.S. patients, for example, in a financial environment? Is that allowed? I'm not sure it's allowed. It may be allowed. But how are you going to manage that versus that same person being in the U.S. and accessing that data? So I don't know the answer to that. So I'm throwing that out because you raised that question. I'm curious. And that's one of the scenarios we're all dealing with.
Yeah, on those aspects, yes, the legal boundaries and all that, but also on the performance, which is why it's important for the service provider to be in, is if you want to really reduce the latency, if you do MEC, and this is the next big thing, to be able to have performance, whatever, gaming, virtual reality, very, very bandwidth intensive thing. If you can't put your security close to where you are, if you have to go back and forth the whole world just to secure the service, you lose because the latency will increase. So you also need to be able to place your security where your workload, where the traffic goes. If you have to go back and forth the planet all the time, you will never get your latency down. And that's also why we are part of this and part of why the service provider is so important to that, because this is how you get to that point of very good latency and all the rest, and the security and everything.
I think that's a very good point, because I didn't mention that because obviously time is limited, but we have by no means the intention to save money by putting people out on the internet. But we did a pilot in South Africa. We improved user experience. Like the delay on average to an application in the cloud went from 10 seconds to less than 1 second by putting people on the internet in Johannesburg. Because before they had to go to the centralized breakout in Dublin and then all the way travel back down. So it's more about user experience than it is about like trying to save money, which is not really the idea. I'll probably be not saving money at the end of the day. But the user experience is more important
if
for
you
us.
provide better, more services, that was your question at the beginning. Of course, it costs more if you go to a service provider and they provide you guaranteed bandwidth to Office 365, for example, and security with it, and you add up more services. You provide more of a marketplace and a platform for multiple services than simply connectivity. And this is where there is great revenue to make, as far as we can tell. Also, the knowledge and the talent gap we always talk about. Security, we expect 1 to 3 million missing people in the next 2 years. So think of medium-sized enterprise. They won't be able to hire those guys. They will be eager to get a service from someone who can provide it from the network.
I want to touch on the theme of this Congress this week. This is, when I was with ONF, where I worked before MEF, we co-hosted at least the first 8 conferences by Layer 1, 2, 3, mostly on the subject of SDN, also NFV. And I look at the LSO reference architecture. It would not exist without SDN and NFV, because what we have here are some abstractions of these different elements, from resource orchestration and elements, the BSS and OSS functions as we've described them. Those are abstracted notions, and we still have operations going on in the forwarding plane, but we have management, control, and orchestration elsewhere. And that separation of forwarding and control is really the heart of what SDN brought to the world. And it has enabled this architecture, and I think what is changing, it certainly fostered the change in enterprise use of the cloud, but it's also fostered changes, I think, in the relationship between the operators and the vendors in terms of what you get from whom. So I'd like to ask Jeff how that separation that's reflected in LSO and MEF 3.0 is affecting the way you procure things from vendors.
Yeah, so that's a transformation we're going through right now. In fact, a blockchain and the blockchain MEFnet application that we're going to do, we're part of, and we're looking at that specific use case. What happens when you have settlements from multiple providers going through these NNIs? How do you automate the provisioning or the payments of those invoices? That's something that we're going to be testing as well. But it has 2 angles to it. It forces us as service providers to re-engineer how we're delivering service in a way that's going to significantly reduce our cost and automate what we're doing, right? So that's internally the selfish end of this. We should be able to do this and scale it and embrace this as part of our own digital journey, our digital transformation from Tata's perspective. That's the first thing. The second thing is from a customer's perspective, we go out and we say, here's your service, here's your network. Any of us do this, and we say 30 days, 60 days, right? That doesn't work anymore. That is not a viable solution for anyone in this industry any longer. So what the reference architecture does, what these APIs does, is not only forces us to embrace northbound, southbound delivery of service, but eastbound and westbound to our partners, and allows us all to deliver services with the level of expectations our customers desire, reduces our cost, reduces the customer's price point at the same time, and gets service in the customer's hands much quicker. And that ends up being a win-win for everyone. Really, there's no downside to that relationship. From a managed services provider standpoint, where do we go in terms of running our business? It's about all of the things that we layer on top of that. It's the wrapper, it's the envelope of virtual services, of certain capabilities like security, access from a public and private perspective, lots of different data centers to cloud service providers. It's wrapping all of those things around it as opposed to just deploying the individual network components. And so that's why it's really a win for us in the marketplace, and it's why we're pushing so hard in the MEF to get this out there, and why we're also frankly saying, it's not just, it's not an Ethernet question. So the MEF shouldn't have to look at it just from an Ethernet perspective. It's network related. So the reference architecture, LSO, looks at all of these network components because they're all trying to do the same thing at the end of the day.
That's a good point, because what we want the operators to be able to do is to craft services and applications that are really invariant over the different transport technologies you might have. if you've got a service that has to go from, as the slide showed, somewhere on one continent to somewhere on another, and you're going to have, carrier Ethernet maybe somewhere, you'll have some pure optical, you have some managed optical, you might have some microwave, you might even have a 5G endpoint somewhere. The service isn't going to want to care, and you're going to want to be able to adopt the most convenient and effective technologies over time as possible without having to change the service, without having everything vertically integrated. I think the north-south interfaces I looked at and said, well, this is really liberating for the operators. Turns out the most popular ones right now are east-west, because it allows you to automate the interconnection of global services. And so I'm excited by those as well, although that's a little bit by surprise for me, because I sort of came from the vertical side of the world. I have a train to catch to Antwerp for dinner tonight, so I would just like to go down and give everyone a chance to say one last thing you would like everyone to remember. Gert?
I just hope that everybody, or the people that we're buying services from today, understand after what we talked about that we need something more than just basic connectivity, because we're going to connect everybody up to the internet, and that'll work too.
And you certainly want to look at MEF-certified service providers as well. So what that means, and we haven't really talked about here, is that we've gone through and we've validated that a lot of these things we're talking about we actually can do. It comes up in RFPs, it comes up in the performance or what we deliver to enterprises, as well as how we connect to service providers. So if we go and work with an AT&T, a Verizon, and others, they'll say, hey, I'm going to hand you service, and it has to be MEF certified. We're going to say that's great, because if you hand me service, it has to be MEF certified. So when we work together, we're working together with a common framework, and that common framework has been developed as part of all the MEF work that we've been doing. So really use that as a litmus test to determine, can they do what they say, and has it been tested and validated, and does it perform?
More on the security as a service project is in its infancy. We need more people. We need your feedback, your requirements, etc. If you doubt that there is business out of it, look at any public clouds or things like Uber. The value of being global is key, and MEF allow you to turn to your customers and look global, even if you partner. So that's enough for the customers. You look global, you're global. And there is a lot of demands for security. So those two together, you should be joining and helping us define the service. I'm the technology provider. I know what to do and how to do it. I know more how to do it and what to protect from. You know what you can sell, or you make a service out of it, because that's what service provider needs to turn to. That part is up to you. I have some ideas, of course, but it's not me who wants to sell it at the end. So this is why we need that interaction now, because it takes time to build the ecosystem and everyone to be able to sell those services. But if we don't do it now, we'll take forever, or someone else will take the pie.
Great. Please join me in thanking the panelists.
Thank you.